Hi, this video is essentially a follow-up to the neutral density filter infographic that I posted to my blog earlier this week. The infographic on neutral density filters on my blog is basically a basic explanation of what a neutral density filter is and a few common uses of them. One of the common uses being water, another common use is being the clouds, and what I mean by water is photographers will use them to slow the shutter speed down enough to go from a photo where the water would be frozen in time to where the water smoothens out, less details, kind of gives it a silky look, especially if they're taking photographs of streams or waterfalls. The other example I put was clouds. Photographers will use them for landscape photos to essentially slow down the shutter speed enough to go from a cloud just sitting there in the sky to streaks across the sky. This photograph that I'm going to put on the screen right here is a photo that I took of a pier in Ocean City, New Jersey a few years ago, and I had placed my 10-stop neutral density filter on the front of my camera, on the lens, and I'd lowered the ISO as to the lowest native ISO I can get to not only ensure the shutter speed stays as long as it could or gets to the longest time it could, but also produce the cleanest photo. And as a result, that photo was taken at, I believe it was about a 30-second shutter speed, which means that the camera, the shutter opened and didn't close for another 30 seconds. That's 30 seconds of letting all that light in. That's how dark that 10-stop neutral density filter is. It cuts 10 stops of light. These are neutral density filters. There's a variable neutral density filters out there where it's one filter and you just rotate a dial and it changes how dark or light the filter is. I have single ones. If I want to, I can scroll these together and stack them and get extremely dark or whatever combination of these I want. But as I said in the infographic, think of them as sunglasses, and a neutral density filter as sunglasses for your lens. It basically, if you put a particular darkness on there, will let a certain amount of light in, and if you put a really dark one, it lets a lot less light in. It's basically just like sunglasses. It determines how much light gets through onto the sensor. So as you can see, some of them come in lighter, which lets a little bit more light in, and these definitely the ones that I have progress in darkness. So as you can see that they get darker and then darker. See what I mean? So they get darker and darker. They let essentially less and less light in as they get darker. So what I wanted to do, the idea of this video was to put a very visual representation of this to pair with the infographic that I could post on my website. The very visual representation is, if you look behind me, I have this fan. I'll duck so you can see the fan. Okay, I have this fan, I have it connected to my Nikon D810, and I have that tethered to the computer, so you can see that as I add the ND filters, what what effect it produces, how it affects motion. So right now, I've got the camera set to have a very high shutter speed, 3200th of a second. The shutter opens and closes in 3200th of a second. All right, and I have that so that it could be the resulting photo is not only does it pretty much stop the motion of the fan, but it's evenly exposed. As I add the filters, I'm going to change the settings to just keep it evenly exposed, not to keep it at that shutter speed. I'm just going to change the settings just to keep it evenly exposed, and you'll see what happens with the motion. So the first picture that I take, you'll see that all it does is it pretty much stops the fan. The fan is on, but as I take the photograph at 3200ths of a second, you can see that there's a little motion blur around the edge of the fan, but mostly you can see all the detail in the fan. It stopped mostly the motion of the fan. So now if I take the lightest ND filter that I have and I place it on my lens, I'm going to do it gently so I don't change anything as far as like zoom. And now you can see, if you look at the meter right here, the light meter, that it essentially said, hey, it got much darker. So I'm going to lower the shutter speed to bring the light meter back to the center. I'm keeping the ISO the same and the aperture the same. If this was a landscape shot and I was taking a photograph of a nice stream, I'd be keeping the aperture the same and the depth of field of the same. I'd be keeping the ISO the same, but I'd be lowering the shutter speed. So if there was a stream, you'll see what happens. I'm going to take the photo again, and you can see that there's now a good decent amount more motion blur to the fan. They lowered the shutter speed, which in turn, by sticking basically a pair of sunglasses in front of the camera, it's letting a little less light in, and it's making me have to lower the shutter speed to evenly expose the photograph. So now, when I take that on and I put this one, the first one it's a 0.6 density, neutral density filter. So that's essentially basically how much light it was cutting. This one is a 0.9. So now I'm putting it on. And as you can see, it lowered right here. It lowered the light meter is saying that it's seeing that it's going to be a darker photo. There's less light being let in. So I'm going to lower the shutter speed to bring the light meter back to the center. All right, and I'm going to take the photograph again. And now you can see the resulting photo is, of course, you can see a little bit more detail. You can see some detail in the fan, but there's a lot more motion as far as the fan's going. It's not being able to freeze the motion like it did in the beginning, and that's because I'm keeping the photo as evenly exposed as I can, but because I'm putting the sunglasses with the neutral density filter in front of it, it's cutting the light, and as a result, I have to lower the shutter speed to keep the photo as evenly exposed as I can. I'm putting my 1.2 on there. And that's essentially just how many stops of light it's cutting. And now you can see that again, it's metering the scene, and it's saying, hey, there's a less light coming in, so I've got to, for me to evenly expose it, I need to lower the shutter speed even more, and I'll take the photo. And now you can see there's a lot more motion. This is essentially, if I was going for in a photograph, say a picture of a fan, and I wanted to show, hey, this fan's on, obviously this is a much better way of doing it than this one up here. So a lot more motion because I have to lower the shutter speed again to keep it evenly exposed. I'm not changing any of the other settings. I'm not changing the depth of field. For whatever scene that I'm shooting, I want to keep it at 2.8. I don't want to have to raise, and I can't with this lens lower that at all. So this is a good example where if I was shooting and I wanted to lower the shutter speed or raise the shutter speed, I can't lower I can't go any lower than 2.8 on this lens. This is a 2.8, 24 to 70, 2.8. So I can't go to 1.8 because it just isn't capable. So to let more light in instead of having to change the shutter speed. So this is my 10 stop. This is the last one. Now this is really dark. The meter might be too dark for the meter. And a lot of times when you're using a 10-stop neutral density filter, or if I didn't have the 10-stop but I was stacking these together and your camera can't meter, you can, if you have a smartphone, I know I have an iPhone, and in the Apple App Store there are neutral density filter calculators where you meter the scene before you put the 10-stop on, and then in the calculator you say, I have a 10-stop neutral density filter, but without putting it on, my shutter speed is this, my ISO is this, my f-stop is this, and it takes it and says, okay, with the ND filter on, for a 5-second exposure, you would set the camera to, or to make it evenly exposed, you set it to 5 seconds or 2 seconds. It determines your shutter speed for you, and then you just set it to that in manual. So this is the 10-stop, and it does read it, and you can see it got very dark. I lowered it quite a bit, and I'm going to take the photo. That is even darker than, so I'll have to keep going because that's darker than I thought it would be. Now this is raw, so I'm just going to bring up the exposure so you can see it, because I would have to go, I mean, if I bring it down like that, let's keep going with the 10 stop to see how slow of a shutter speed I'd have to go to essentially at least show me an evenly exposed photograph. I'd say that these are close, right about there. So right now, this with the 10 stop on there, I had to do 1/4 of a second to get it to be, and which even shows the light meter being, it would be saying that it's too bright. But if you look at the histogram up here, it's essentially right there, almost in the middle. Okay, so that's a little bit better, 1/3 of a second. So as you can see, the difference between no neutral density filter on there and the progression of adding the darker neutral density filters into the point where I put my 10 stop on there, and I obviously can't see any detail whatsoever in the blades of the fan, and it's just complete motion. I would take that example and transfer that to a photo of a stream or a waterfall or the ocean. You know, if I essentially raised my stopped on my f-stop, and on this lens it's f22. If I put this at f22 and say ISO 100 with the 10 stop neutral density filter on there, I could have a shutter speed of a couple of minutes, depending on how light it is outside or how dark. You know, a couple of minutes, I mean, that's how essentially I could get, you know, streaks of lights, the stars streaking, city shots where the lights, essentially, you don't see any detail in the cars, it's just all blurry, but you see the taillights and the headlights. You know, I mean, a couple of minutes for those city shots, I would say, be too long, but I mean, those 30 seconds, give or take, that's the neutral density filters are what gives me the ability to do that. So I know that was a little bit longer of an explanation than I had planned, but I wanted to give you a good visual to pair with the infographic, so that, because if you're like me, where essentially I do learn better by seeing and doing, it essentially will expand on what the information the infographic what I had already said in the infographic. I hope you found the video helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope this video was helpful and you were able to take something away from it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.